Tonight on Let It Rip.
Human life is sacred. The unborn are members of the human family.
For anyone to say that they have a right to tell another person what to do with their body, a woman is going to be forced to have a baby.
What's next for Michigan after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade? Could we see a new law codifying abortion rights in the state? Or will a trigger law prevail in the courts, making it a crime? But first,
what people need to do is mobilize. If this is an issue that you care deeply about, and most of us do.
We go one-on-one with Attorney General Dana Nessel, who's asking for your vote to put her back in office for 4 more years. Time now to Let It Rip. We're once again in studio as we welcome the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, Democrat Dana Nessel. Not only is she the current chief law enforcement officer in the state, but she's also, of course, running for re-election in November. Madam Attorney General, good to see you always. Thanks for joining us tonight on Let It Rip.
Thanks for having me.
So we have a lot going on, and I know you're limited in how much you can talk about our first topic. But when it comes to Flint and the charges dropped against ex-Governor Snyder in this case, what do you tell the voters of mid-Michigan and Flint in particular who feel like maybe that you've thrown away their only shot of getting justice here?
Well, firstly, you know, the Supreme Court in their ruling, it was literally a ruling of mechanics about the use of the grand jury procedure, which has been around for decades, been used by prosecutors as a key investigative tool all around the state of Michigan, and no one has ever indicated that there was anything problematic about it from a legal perspective. So this isn't a comment on the evidence or the merits of the case. And there's no reason to think that these cases are not going to resume and move forward. The cases that are felonies, well, those defendants will now be entitled to a preliminary examination, but that's the only difference between then and now.
What gives? Why do you think the Supreme Court all of a sudden came down with this?
Because this is the first time that this particular mechanism has ever been challenged. And when you have a bunch of very wealthy defendants whose legal tab is being picked up by the state, and they can spend as much money as they want on as many lawyers as they want, you know, you're going to have all kinds of motions filed that are not normally filed. And so this was something, it was upheld by the circuit court bench, it was upheld by the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court decided to go a different way the first time they evaluated this mechanism. But that doesn't mean that there's anything unworthy about the cases. And I will say this, you know, our Solicitor General, Fadwa Hammoud, and Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy, who I think knows a thing or two about prosecuting cases, I have the utmost faith that they're going to do and continue to do whatever the right thing is in this circumstance. And if that means continuing to pursue charges, then that's what they're going to do. In
retrospect, when you take a look back at 2019, you took the special prosecutor, you moved the special prosecutor out, you threw away essentially the old case and said, look, we're going to start from scratch. Do you regret that now? Not for a second.
You know, Solicitor General Hammoud and Prosecutor Worthy made it incredibly clear that those cases were a mess, and they were never, ever going to survive the motions that were pending to dismiss those cases, let alone have a jury of 12 people convict based on the evidence that he had pursued. I mean, there were so many additional documents that they obtained, search warrants that they executed, devices that they reviewed that were never looked at by the original prosecutor on the case. So I'm very confident that they've done the right thing and that they're going to continue to do the right thing.
Is your office done with Governor Snyder?
Well, again, I can't be part of the decision-making process because it was my job to be on the civil side where I settled those cases. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of cases that were pending against the state based on what had occurred. So what we did, as soon as I got into office, we began negotiating with the attorneys representing the residents of the city of Flint, and we entered into the largest settlement in the history of the state of Michigan to try to do our best to make those residents whole again. So I did my job. I wasn't allowed to be on both the civil side and the criminal side. So that's why I appointed some of the best prosecutors in the state to do that, and I have every confidence in them.
Are you worried that this will be used against you during this election and used against you in a very fierce way?
Well, you know, it's ironic to me because this, grand jury system that has been around for ages. I've never heard Republicans complain about it when it was utilized against, gangs. I've never heard them complain about it when it was used in regard to homicides or attempted murder cases, or the many ways it's been utilized in the past. I thought that the Republicans were the party that were anti-crime, according to them. We have used this as a tool to fight crime, and I have some of the biggest criminal prosecutions that have ever taken place in American history in my office right now, including the clergy abuse investigation and the Boy Scouts of America investigation. So, I have been relentless when it comes to prosecuting those who have harmed people in our state, especially children. So I'm happy to discuss my record when it comes to fighting crime and fighting those that hurt our community members any day of the week.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court, of course, overturning the 1973 Roe v. Wade. Moving forward now, we're looking at the states that have the responsibility to take a close look at this. You have a very personal reason to care about abortion. This isn't just an issue. This is something that has really affected you personally. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, I was one of those people who never in a million years thought that I would need an abortion. But, I got pregnant back in 2002 and became pregnant with twins, had a very, very complicated pregnancy. And, the babies were not growing. They had profound intrauterine growth retardation. And I was told that the only way that any of them would survive is if I aborted one. And so I wanted children so badly that I took my doctor's advice. And I did. And two survived, and I now have two amazing 19-year-old sons that I love more than anything on God's green earth. And I know that had I not taken my doctor's advice, I would be childless right now. And that was a very difficult decision to make, but I should have had the right to make that decision, not politicians in Lansing, not politicians in Washington, D.C., and certainly not the guy who's running against me that believes that there should be no exceptions under any circumstances for abortion,
now,
which is terrifying.
He said that soundbite was taken out of context when we had him on the show, and that there is a belief that perhaps in certain circumstances this should be used. But in general, though, when it comes to the life of a mother, he says that he believes, on this program, he said that should be protected. But when you look at what Democrats, Madam Attorney General, have said so far, they say, look, this ruling is illegitimate. Do you agree with that?
I believe that a woman should have bodily autonomy to make decisions over her own body, and that, the thought that we're going to have somebody potentially in office that would go after not just doctors, but nurses, even anybody who schedules the appointment for a woman who might need an abortion. I don't think it's for an attorney general in Lansing to say to someone who has preeclampsia or who has high blood pressure, or a 12-year-old who was raped by her uncle, or even a domestic violence victim who now has to be tethered to her abuser, understanding that the highest risk to pregnant women is homicide by domestic violence. I don't think it's for anyone like that to make that decision for a person. It should be for her woman, for her doctor, for her family if she chooses to discuss it with them. And that's between her and her God. It is not for politicians, and it's not for a state prosecutor to make that decision for her.
But the highest court in the land has made their decision. Some people are saying it's illegitimate. Do you think it's illegitimate?
All I know is we have this 1931 law on the books that predates the abortion medication that we have today, and we know that the vast majority of people who have abortions do it in their first trimester. Most people use abortion medication, and the fact that it's outlawed now is deeply concerning. I know women all around the state that have said to me that they are not going to try to get pregnant, even though they and their partners badly want to have children, because they're so afraid of what procedures their doctor can or cannot perform at this time, even if it might be needed for that woman's health. Even if there are, extreme abnormalities with the fetus, so that we know that that fetus would never, ever be able to live outside the womb, that it will be the decision of a prosecutor to decide whether or not to prosecute that woman under certain circumstances, or to prosecute, medical staff who take a Hippocratic oath to do what's best for the patient, and they'll no longer be able to do that.
But when we take a look at the whole system here, we have people out there who are calling this decision illegitimate. Is that an attack on democracy to question so greatly the Supreme Court's decision by calling this an illegitimate decision? Is that an attack on democracy?
I think the problem that people have is that, firstly, Merrick Garland, let's face it, should have been appointed to the bench, and the Republicans intentionally stalled that. And you have a majority of justices now that were appointed by presidents that didn't win the popular vote. And you have these decisions in place that are not reflective at all of popular sentiment. And we can look at that in a million different ways, but this is a court that certainly is extreme. It's radical. It doesn't care about the concept of stare decisis or precedential value of its cases, and it's just not reflective of the sentiments of the vast majority of the public anymore.
But would you go so far as to say that this decision is legitimate or illegitimate?
Well, I would say that it's important that we have respect for the court, and we have to abide by the court's rulings. But I think nothing says more than the fact that only 25% of the public now believe that this is a nonpartisan entity and have respect for the United States Supreme Court, because the court's only as good as the orders it issues. And when you have these very partisan acting actors, I mean, look at Clarence Thomas. The fact that his wife was a participant in the insurrection and wanting to overturn a legitimate election, and yet he refused to recuse himself from consideration of January 6th related cases. How can you respect a court that operates that way?
Well, respect and questioning how deeply you decide to question this court's decision. This is, as you say, the law of the land. And for now, of course, now it's up to the states. But Attorney General Dana Nessel, good to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight on Let It Rip. And when we come back, we're going to be taking some of these topics right to our panel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Let It Rip as we talk about what's next for Michigan after last week's Supreme Court decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, returning the abortion debate back to the states. Joining us now is Rebekah Keisley, a pro-life activist and president of Save the One, an organization that discourages abortion, even in the case of rape or incest. Ali Savitt is the Washtenaw County prosecutor who says he'll refuse to enforce Michigan's 1931 trigger law, which makes abortion a felony in the state. And Kristen Polo is a spokeswoman for the pro-life group Citizens to Protect Women and Children. And of course, we're joined by Alexis Wiley, a former Fox 2 reporter who now owns her own consulting firm, Moment Strategies. She works with a number of pro-choice organizations. We welcome all of you here to the panel tonight. Back in person here on Let It Rip. It's good to see you here in Studio A. Let's talk about Flint for just a moment, though, because we just had the Attorney General who was on a moment ago. And Ali, we'll begin with you. You heard what the Attorney General said, saying she really didn't see that there would be an issue using a one-man jury when she went forth with the Flint prosecution against Governor Snyder. What are your thoughts on that? Have you heard of a one-man grand jury like this?
So absolutely, I've heard of it. I know they are used in other counties. I will say that in Washtenaw County, we have not had occasion to use one. We haven't used one since I've been in office, and my predecessor never had occasion to use one either. I believe during the 28 years he was there. So it's not a practice that we engage in Washtenaw County, but look, the Michigan Supreme Court has of course spoken, and I have every confidence in the Attorney General to get justice for the people of Flint and her team there. I understand she's conflicted out, and I'm really hoping that Flint people get justice.
I misspoke saying, have you heard of it? Of course, everyone's heard of it, but have you actually used it in Washtenaw County? Is that something that's common? And Alexis, you were saying earlier that this is something that ultimately we just have to look at the people of Flint. They deserve justice, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what people experienced, the trauma, the fact that Flint is still trying to come back from this years later shows that they really deserve justice. They deserve action. But at the same time, this issue around the one-man grand jury does raise questions when we say that we're a country where we want justice for everyone, that, you expect that things would be followed in a certain way. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to that, but my hope is that at the end of the day, the community, the people who've been so deeply impacted by what happened get justice.
And that is something that everyone's looking for. Let's talk to Rebekah Keisley now, a pro-life activist, about this particular case. Here we have the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade, up to the states now. First of all, when it comes to abortion, what are your thoughts? Is there any circumstance in which you believe abortion would be okay?
Well, of course, nobody wants to see women die. And so that's why pro-life legislation always includes the exception in cases of life of the mother. But, you know, my story is that I was conceived in rape, and my birth mother tried to kill me at 2 illegal abortions and backed out because of the 1931 law, which protected me, and the original 1846 law in Michigan that's still on the books. And so it was, you know, tough when Roe v. Wade was overturned, not to see that law back in effect here in Michigan, because we had this judge where there was a complete conflict of interest. Really, this is what the court said in League of Women Voters. They call it a friendly scrimmage, that's not a legitimate case. And so it's in the Court of Appeals in Michigan and up to the Supreme Court. They're looking at it. I filed an amicus brief. So I hope to see that law back in effect here in Michigan.
Someone like Ellie doesn't like that law. He said, look, I'll refuse to enforce it. Does he have that choice?
Well, I mean, you know, we had the Attorney General too saying that she won't do anything. And in a sense, that's like anarchy when you start saying that, you know, I'm going to decide what's the law and what's not. You know, you're not the legislature.
Ellie, you don't like that law, and you wouldn't enforce it. You would stand against it.
I would not enforce it. And look, prosecutorial discretion is well established. There's not a single prosecutor in the entire country that brings every single case that comes across their desk. We are elected precisely to exercise our discretion and to reflect the values of our community.
But it's more than that. It's saying this whole class of law you won't enforce. Not that, oh, we don't have good evidence in this case in deciding which ones you take. You're just saying you won't enforce the law.
And that is accurate. And there are other classes of laws that I know no prosecutors enforce in the state of Michigan. We have a law against adultery that is still on the books in the state of Michigan. I don't know of a single prosecutor that actually enforces that law, because whatever you think about infidelity, I think most people agree that it's not something for the criminal legal system. And my decision on abortion is based on my overarching concern for the health and well-being of my community and the people in my community. We know that the criminalization of abortion does not stop abortions from happening. What it can do is delay abortion care and make it more dangerous later on, or force a pregnant person to carry a pregnancy to term where her life may be in danger. I'm responsible with protecting health and safety, and prosecuting these cases undermines that overarching goal. So that's why I'm
Kristen, you're working really hard right now to work against that constitutional amendment. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing and what your thoughts are when you hear Ellie, who's a prosecutor, say, hey, I'm not going to do it.
I think it's ironic that you sit here and say that you are opposed to this abortion law from 1931 because you want to help women and protect women, when you're also supporting this anything goes abortion amendment that's before voters potentially on the November ballot. They're collecting signatures for it right now. Something that's extremely dangerous for women and extremely dangerous for children, because it repeals health and safety standards that protect women when they go into abortion clinics. It repeals parental consent. Parents have a responsibility to know what's happening with their children, and this would repeal that. So I don't buy it that you believe
Alexis,
you want to
what are your
protect
thoughts
women,
on that,
and you
that you're not protecting women by doing what Ellie's talking about
What's
here?
truly dangerous is criminalizing these healthcare decisions, and the fact that we as women should be able to make the decisions in the privacy of having conversations with our healthcare providers about what's right for us. We lost a critical right when the Supreme Court made their decision. It's wrong, and the vast majority of people in this state, regardless of how they feel about abortion, they believe that women should have the right to make these kinds of decisions
The Supreme
for
Court made their
themselves.
decision because abortion isn't a right that women have.
It is absolutely a right that we've had, and we need to make sure that healthcare
And
is
he
not
made the decision because he
criminalized,
said
and
this
that's
is
important.
different. This
We cannot
involves
continue
the
this.
ending of a human life. You know, this is not like other liberty interests, because you're talking about someone dies. That's science. This is a living human being, and someone dies with an abortion.
If we continue to criminalize abortion, move into that space. All that's going to stop is safe and legal abortion. Death will be happening.
Abortion, but our law criminalizes doctors who know
but
better.
Rebekah, does that concern you that if this ends up being something that people can't go out and do legally, they're going to do it anyways, and when they do it anyways, it's going to end up putting a lot of people's lives at risk. Does that concern you at all?
First of all, it's a different world today than it was back in, when I was born in 1969. 3.5 years before Roe v. Wade. My birth mother said that there were no pregnancy resource centers back then, but if there had been, she would have gone. But nobody offered her any other help or hope, just abortion. And also with the abortion pill, the fact is that that's probably where most people are going to have their access to abortion. Biden made it legal so that you can just get it through the mail, and that is probably what women will do. Sadly, women are being harmed today while it's legal through the abortion pill. There's women who take it when it's far too late, when they shouldn't be taking it. There's women who end up with complications. They're too ashamed to go into the hospital to say, I took this abortion pill and now I'm hemorrhaging.
Do you think, Ellie, that getting rid of this right will actually erode the other rights that we have right now on the books?
I'm very concerned about that, and I want to actually respond to the criticism of the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot initiative, which, by the way, not just protects a right to an abortion up to fetal viability, but also protects.
It is true.
It is true. It's in the text of the Reproductive Freedom Amendment.
And
anybody can go online,
and they can
look at it. It reestablishes the framework that was the law of the land for a half century as of Thursday of last week. So to say it's an anything goes ballot initiative is simply not true. But in addition, you asked about the other rights.
I don't want to talk about other rights. Is the Supreme Court after the other rights as well? Is this a downward slope?
If you read the opinions in the Dobbs case, it certainly tees up potential challenges to other rights, like the right to contraceptives, like the right to consensual same-sex relationships, Lawrence versus Texas, like the right to same-sex marriage in Obergefell. Those are potentially, if you read Clarence Thomas's opinion on the chopping block. Now, back to the ballot amendment. Back to the ballot amendment, really quick, and I'll stop. Back to the ballot amendment. The ballot amendment actually protects, in addition to abortion up to the viability standard, as under Roe, contraceptives, IVF, all reproductive decisions that I think the vast majority of Michiganders rely on to make for themselves with the advice of medical professionals.
Those were added as deception to make you think like, this is like we're not going to have a right to prenatal care if we don't, agree to this amendment. Those things were just added to try to, put lipstick on a pig.
But I think it's very important for voters to know when it talks about viability in the language of the amendment, and I encourage people to go online and read this for themselves. They can go to our website, supportmiwomenandchildren.org, because it's not on the RFFA website. They can read the actual language and see that when it talks about viability, it goes on to say that a late-term abortion can be approved for the physical and mental health of the woman that could be defined as anything. We know that from the Doe v. Bolton case, that mental health could be that you're experiencing anxiety late term and you decide to have an abortion because of it. So it does legalize abortion.
Let's talk for a moment about that slippery slope that many people are concerned about. We asked Ellie about it. Alexis, when you hear and read Clarence Thomas's words, does that concern you that he's after some other rights as well?
Absolutely. I mean, he literally said that in his opinion, and that's the concern.
It was a concurring opinion.
At the end of the day,
not the majority opinion.
Okay, you spoke, so let's let everyone have an opportunity.
Go ahead, Alexis.
So really, what we need to be doing is looking at the fact that government has no right to be making these decisions for us. These are private decisions. If you don't agree with abortion, that is one thing. But at the same time, to say that people don't have a right and women don't have the right to make decisions that make sense for them is wrong. And I believe that we need to protect the right to privacy.
It's the right most fundamental role of government to protect human life.
Coming up here, but Rebekah, can you see how some people are concerned reading Clarence Thomas's opinion, which is an opinion?
difference. And Alito read the dissents, and he amended that draft opinion that was leaked. He amended it to add the crystal clear language that this will not impact on other liberty interests that are found under the 14th Amendment.
Let's go ahead. Let's take a break. Why don't you collect your thoughts, and we'll come back with a look at some final thoughts from our panel right after this. Thoughts will begin with Alexis.
Reproductive freedom is on the ballot in November. Show up and vote for it.
Kristen?
Go to supportmiwomenandchildren.org to read the amendment text for itself and see how radical it is.
Ellie?
The U.S. Supreme Court decided that abortion is no longer a fundamental right protected by the federal Constitution and called a whole host of other rights into question. If you want to preserve those rights, vote for the MI Reproductive Freedom Initiative.
Rebekah, your thoughts?
In half the country, children will be born because the law will protect them and their mothers will be thankful, and the left will not want to hear their voices.
All of you, thank you for your time today on this very difficult and controversial issue. We thank you for watching this edition of Let It Rip.